an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Wizard's Holiday, Chapter 14 and Epilogue. In these chapters, Quelt has to make a new choice on behalf of her people, but she does involve them in the overall decision, and Roshaun does something noble? Maybe? Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Patricia for commissioning this episode. Hi, Patricia, if you're out there. Thank you for being flexible. I had to reschedule this and just having to do a lot of that lately. Nothing seems to be going according to plan. And I guess that's just life, kids. So this final chapter, I think that most of us figured that there would be a new choice by the end of this, that this is how this is going to go. That does not mean that I didn't enjoy watching how it played out and seeing how the conversation went. Because I am, this was my main concern, which was just how do you get people who are living in a literal paradise to agree that they shouldn't be anymore? And I just couldn't see how that would work. And really what it comes down to is something that is difficult to put into words because we're not experiencing this exactly. But I think that a lot of us are probably experiencing a version of this, which is to say, we have a whole planet full of people who all feel like there is supposed to be something else. A whole planet of people who really sense something is missing. And it's a lot more understandable to me now why they would agree with Quelt making this new choice, because they have all had a sense of something being not quite right that has been plaguing them, and they haven't really been able to pinpoint what the issue is. And that's part of what it turns out the deal is with Nita being the one to tell Quelt. Quelt admits that she had been sort of thinking something was missing, but it wasn't until Nita very readily agreed with her when she voiced that thought that she began to really believe maybe there was something to it. So this whole thing I found it interesting to see how the argument was presented. Yamada's here. I thought it was tomorrow. We are also doing one tomorrow, but this is rescheduled from Friday because I had to cancel. So chapter 14 starts off with the lone one being so fucking delighted that it has tricked Nita. You were so earnest and so careless and so patronizing. You have deserved this so profoundly, I can barely express it. I mean, the thing about the lone one is that because of its very nature, it speaks to the worst, pettiest parts of us. And so there are times where I have felt this exact thing. And what you would see from a being that is better is even if somebody did deserve it, it would be painful to them to have to exact that punishment or consequence, however you want to see it, on them. But the lone one is delighted by it. And it makes me just look, here's the thing. Sometimes we take pleasure in bad things. For example, a vaccine conspiracy theorist / COVID denier dying of COVID. Is it nice to crow over the fact that this asshole was peddling misinformation and then fell to the very thing they're claiming doesn't really exist? It is not nice. And yet, here we are. I'm not only fine with it, but kind of chalk one up to our side in the fucking tally every time it happens. Is that great? No. Should I have more compassion? Yes. But so there's moments like this where I'm just like, man, I want to be better. Somebody who is better than me would have a very different reaction. But that's the human part of us, I guess. That's I say that's the human part, but really both are human. It's just that one of them is kinder and more compassionate and generous than the other. And when somebody's doing active harm, it's hard to feel like the world isn't a better place if they're not out here trashing it, you know? But anyway, that just line that got to me. You have deserved this so profoundly, I can scarcely express it. Oh, man. And generation after generation of them will live out their happy little lives and die into the world. They'll keep on doing that until their star goes cold and their species oh so gracefully surrenders as a whole to what they will wrongly consider fate. So much for their intended glory. The one is just going to have to do without them. And as for me, not only do I have all these poor frozen fools to amuse me the first idle eons until time's end, but now I also have you two to laugh at for the rest of this universe's eternity, and your faces to entertain me as your souls writhe endlessly for the mistakes you made, the loved ones who'll never see you again. Priceless. Priceless. And then somebody drops a stick on Assembly's head, and it is Paunch, who is here with Quelt. We knew Paunch was going to come in on the clinch. But what I do find really delightful is later on, Kit can't help but point out to the lone one, you were the one who rushed us. If it hadn't been for how eager you were to screw us over, Paunch would have been with us, and he wouldn't have been able to come down here and assist. But you didn't want to wait. You were just so excited. And now here's Paunch fucking it up and bringing Quelt. And now we can carry forward with this whole choice thing. You ruined it for yourself. Oof. That just feels so pointed and true. I don't know about y'all, but things going badly due to your own impatience, that is an entire subset of my failures are specifically due to me being impatient. The thing I think of with this, and this is going to be so basic, but I'm going to say it anyway. When you're watching Great British Bake Off and somebody is trying to do a project that clearly should take 2 full days in a matter of 6 hours. And that's a different kind of impatience, but it really isn't. It comes down to, I want to pull this thing off immediately. And I want to do the undoable, right away. And it just doesn't work out almost ever. Almost ever. Or just wanting to do something without putting the entire thought into it. I had a friend who got a stencil to do a design on her wall. And it was meant to be a repeating design, like a damask sort of pattern. And this, bless her heart, this dumb bitch taped it to the wall without measuring anything, without using a leveling guide or anything to ensure that the pattern was even straight, and just started painting. And then was shocked that shit looked like a mess. And I was like, well, yeah, you didn't plan you didn't stop to figure it out. You didn't want to. You just wanted to get to the whole meat of the thing. And, that's what you get. Yama says, I think my problem with this idea is actually my personal dilemma about the meaning of life, in that I don't really see any meaning, so we might as well try and make a good life and enjoy it. So I want this perfect world. But at the same time, if it's all perfect, why even? That's the extreme of no purpose. And for me, like, the thing is that their perfect life, it didn't serve no purpose at all. It got them to the point where they could move on and evolve into something new, but then they stayed there. So if you are functioning with that belief that there is meaning, I still think we may as well try and make it a good life and enjoy it works. Because that's part of the thing. There's meaning, and part of that meaning lies in making things better. Part of the meaning is striving towards caring for one another and making the world a better place than you left it. So that is evolution, essentially. Like, that is a higher consciousness that you're trying to attain. But, it's the kind of thing where everybody has to be on board with this idea, man. And like, when you've just... I just don't want to talk about COVID deniers anymore. I'm sorry. Owen's aunt died today. And she died from complications following having had COVID. And evidently low-key lied to people about the fact that she had even had COVID. And I just have really complicated feelings about the whole thing. And, I didn't really know her very well. But it was just one of those, like, we didn't know she had ever even had it until they called today to tell us that she was in the hospital from complications of it. And even as they were telling us she was in the hospital, they were trying to assure us that when she had it, it wasn't contagious, which that's not even a thing. So I think they were just trying to make themselves feel like it wasn't a big deal that she had COVID and probably was like out living in the world and not secluding herself the way that she was supposed to. So it's just really, guys, why can't we just care about each other and not do shit? I swear to God, it shouldn't be this hard. Like, it doesn't have to be like this, but we've just like made the world just a mess. So there is Quilt with Paunch. She was wondering where you were, Paunch said to Nita and Kit. So was I, so we came looking. And the lone one says, this will only work this once. Make the most of it. When she releases me, you may later come to regret all this. In fact, I guarantee that you will. And I'm just like, jerk off motion. Look, lone one. I'm sure you think they will. Because you don't really understand, do you? At least the shadow of you doesn't. But if you've really done some good, it's not necessarily going to mean that you regret, even if bad things happen later as a result. If you really truly feel you did the right thing, regret isn't really the thing you feel. It's a frustration, perhaps, a sense of injustice, perhaps, but you're going to feel calm in the deepest heart of hearts because you know that you did the right thing. And I think that sense of rightness, it's not always easy to tell in different situations. You can feel like, what's the right thing to do? And it can sort of seem difficult to really, it feels like it's subjective, you know? But I think if we got the most honest that we can, we usually know. And there is a sense of total peace that comes with that, even if things don't go well as a result of it. There is a sense of, I have my feet firmly planted and I am stable, at least, in the knowledge of the choice I personally made. And that's all we literally have any control over at all. We have choices that we face, and that's our free will. And sometimes doing the right thing hurts, It might hurt you. It might hurt other people. And that doesn't change that it's the right thing. And the lone one, you may later come to regret all this. It's just so revealing about how little it understands that feeling and how ultimately selfish it is and how it sees the world, you know? So Quelt, for her own part, hardly gave Druva more than a glance at first. She went straight over to Kit and Nita and took first Kit, then Nita, by the shoulders in her species greeting. I am so sorry, she said. I treated you so badly when you were only telling me the truth. I feel terrible about it, and I felt terrible before as well. I got you started on all of this. And Nita says, I thought we got you started. No, Quelt said, you just said things idly that made me think more about the things I'd been thinking already. Remember how I said there was something missing? I hadn't been really serious about it before, but after you said you had the same thoughts, they started to matter much more. When the thoughts were inside, I was discounting them. They didn't seem important or real. Yet you were so different, and the place you come from is so different, and you still had those feelings. That was the key. So I really like that, and that turns out to be like a major factor in this overall mission. I mean, they aren't technically supposed to be on errantry, but like, let's be real, they're on errantry. And that's what Nita comes to realize later, is that like, even if the powers themselves came down and stood in front of Quelt and were like, hey, here's the deal, it wouldn't have sunk in. Quelt wouldn't have understood. It had to come from people that she had personally gotten to know and who had grown to understand her universe better. So yeah, this is like, just the tidiness of it works really, really well. And of course that winds up being the case with Darene's whole issue as well. So I love this moment. I love this so much. Quelt turned to Assemily, and as for you, now you'll tell me that all the things you said just now were a lie. Why, of course they were. Say it in the speech, Quelt said. The lone power glared at her. What now, bitch? That's what I thought. I love that so much. All right, Quelt. Go on with your bad self. So, wizardry was being done here, but not in a mode they recognized, and Quelt was at the heart of it. She simply seemed to be standing with her arms by her sides, murmuring in the speech, and a moment later, the crowd surrounding them seemed impossibly much larger than it had. Everyone needs to be here for this, Quelt said softly, but her voice traveled effortlessly right across that mighty assemblage. Nita looked at all the people standing nearest her and Kit and realized it wasn't just the dead who were surrounding them. The living had arrived as well, in spirit if not in body, and were looking around in astonishment at the heart of the world. Now that we are all here, Quelt said, now comes the time to make another choice. Whether to choose again. And here comes Cwilyn and Demare. And they're Quelt's parents. And they are kind of horrified at what their daughter's doing. They don't understand this at all, you know, and I'm not mad at that because it's a really weird, confusing thing. And they're like, you're going to kill everybody? And yeah, like you can't deny that's what it is. It's just not, it's not that simple, but that's not it. Their old lives will end, Quelt said. Yes, tears began to fall. And they are essentially outraged that she's going to try and decide for everyone. And she says someone has to, because you can't start by yourselves anymore. Just listen to you. You should hear yourselves. You're like a bunch of little children who don't want to take a nap in the afternoon because you're afraid you'll miss something. But you have missed something. Didn't you hear the lone one now speaking truly for a change? It told you everything you needed to know, but you never needed it to tell you that. You weren't even listening to the world. None of us has been. We were too happy to listen. Can't you hear what we've been trembling on the brink of? Can't you hear the darkness, the potential that's been chasing around our world forever like the night, just waiting for someone to look up and see it? Our own whisperings drowned out that deeper silence. We talk to ourselves all the time so we won't hear what the silence holds, the risk, the chance. And someone interrupts with the danger, and she says, yes, the danger. How long has it been since there was any danger in our world? Any real danger? We've outgrown passion. These bodies are too used to this world where all the edges and sharp corners have been rubbed off and made safe for us. We live and we die, and everything is perfect and fine. What do we have to do with the rest of the universe anymore? That line in particular kind of got my attention because, the whole thing with the beginning of this was them traveling to Alaalu and nobody ever really going there. And it just not being a nexus of anything. And there being one wizard. And the fact that they have reached this state, but accidentally paused there, where they are so enlightened that they just don't even feel connected to the rest of the entire universe. I mean, that makes a lot of sense that would happen, that you would wind up sort of isolated due to that, And also, I love the equating of the darkness with potential, because that's part of what I have always felt is we talk about darkness as if it's an inherently bad thing. And darkness is just unknown or another state of being. It doesn't have to be an inherently negative thing. And potential is a really beautiful way of putting it. There is, you have to take a risk, and there is the potential of something much better being built in its place if you are willing to take the risk of letting go of something. And her saying the whisperings drowned out the silence that was needed, that silence of potential. Kids, I know that there is a lot of talk, about how the internet's ruining society and yada, yada, yada. And personally, I don't think that's at all true. I think that there are good and bad aspects to it. And I think a lot of the good outweighs a lot of the bad. But there is one thing that I think is dangerous about it. And it's that. The whisperings drowned out the potential. When is the last time that you sat doing anything in silence? Literally. I have not been in complete silence for a minute. I always have my headphones in. I'm listening to music. I'm listening to a podcast. I'm listening to an audiobook. I'm listening to my own shit because I'm editing. I'm watching television. I have the TV on in the background. I have a movie on in the background. I have the radio on. Anything. And because there's always something new available at our fingertips, or because there's a tool at our fingertips by which we can look up more information about literally any thought that pops into our heads, we have turned into these dopamine seekers. And I feel like when we talk about taking a break from social media, a lot of us really stop short of what the actual issue is. Yeah, I think taking a break from social media is in general a good thing. But I think we really need to take a break in general from being constantly crowded mentally, if that makes sense. And I am as guilty of this as anyone. I'm not trying to speak from a place of superiority on this. This is something that I struggle with because when you have depression, especially, or if you are somebody with ADHD, you sometimes feel the need for sound because you are overwhelmed by silence. Or in my case, when I'm going through a hard time, if I sit too long in silence, I become overwhelmed by my sadness. And I can't tell you the number of times where I have taken a second too long to turn something on and have almost started crying because my brain started to go down the road. And it can be hard to feel like that's at all a good thing. And it might not always be. I'm not trying to say that we should be in silence all the time. But I think for me, I shy away from it because it's so overwhelming and scary because I never let myself feel that. And I think if I let myself, I would learn how to cope with it a little bit better and it wouldn't be so scary. But I don't really, because it's scary. It is. You know, people are talking to Quilt here about how like I'm afraid, and she's like, I'm afraid too. And that's like, I really feel like that's a microcosm of this macrocosm sort of situation. Letting yourself just like be and not filling up every moment with noise and stimulus of some kind. And I think that's a huge part of why our memories from like childhood and high school and whatnot are so much more vivid than our memories later in life, because we were so much more in the moment at all times and so much more hyper aware of everything that was going on around us because we were fully engaged and all the time. And we could probably get that back a little if we learned how. It would be hard, but I think we could. And I have had a few moments of straying toward it, and I won't lie, weed helps. And I'm not trying to be funny, but if you have a hyperactive mind like I do, getting a tiny bit stoned helps slow that way down. And I'll suddenly find myself just like, if we have a fire in our fire pit, I'll be able to just sit and look at that fire and fully enjoy that fire without any additional distractions for like 20 straight minutes because I'm there and in it. But God, getting older, it is so hard. You just stop wanting to let yourself rest because you're constantly under pressure to produce, to be busy, because otherwise you are afraid you're lazy. And what's ironic is that it's not that we stop, but like by continuing to stimulate ourselves and fill that void with whatever we like, you know, scrolling through things or listening to stuff, that doesn't mean that we're being productive or doing anything worthwhile. It gives us the illusion of doing that, but it's not actually anything substantial. And it's so like one of those things that I get so mad at myself because I'll have like an hour and a half between recordings and I could do all kinds of things. And what do? I scroll Facebook and Instagram for an hour and a half and I don't feel rested, even though I had a break. I don't feel better because I just read a bunch of shit that made me mad or sad. It's not like it actually does me good. But there's something about it that makes it feel like, well, at least I'm doing something. Not really. Like, for whom? You know? Anyway, I'm sorry. That is a tangent, but you get what I mean, right? You see what I'm saying? Yama is over here. That was a fun idea. At the beginning, I was thinking this was a trap because no one knew about it, but it was actually a forgotten world. Yeah, exactly. Because Yama was reading along with me. And Yama was having the same sort of like, what the fuck? Like, none of this felt like it was a good sign. And it turns out that it was like too good a sign. You know, what a weird way to play it. And like similarly to that, the fact that they don't like allow the rest of the universe to interact with them because they have reached this like high point with their civilization. If you don't give yourself moments to connect and not fill the void with things, you're going to feel really isolated. Even though you're like constantly interacting, it's not going to feel like you're interacting. You're going to feel alone. It's going to feel lonely, even though that's like, it feels like it shouldn't. There's just a lot, I feel like, paralleling this whole world's experience with like an individual experience. And I don't know, I found it like I felt like she was like reading me a little bit, and I was like, God, kind of take it easy there. So somebody is like, do you want our world to go back to the way it was in the very first times before we awoke, where death is dreadful and people die wholesale in horror and pain? And Quelt says, I don't want to go back to anything. I want to go forward to the thing that awaits. And this is when they start to say, I am afraid. Finally, in a great voice, Quelt cried, so am I. But I'm going to do it anyway, so that we can all make the leap together. Think about it. One way or another, we've all got to die eventually. That part of the choice was never in doubt if we were going to live in time. Now we can go forward and find another way to do it. If we fail, what's the worst that can happen? We all go down into the darkness at once, but we'll still be together, and even in the darkness, there's still the one. And when she says that, the lone one turns its face away, and Nita thought she heard teeth grinding. So eventually, there's this silence, and Nita is feeling it, and she looks over at Kit, and he feels it too, that there is a change. And it's not a huge moment of everyone cheering and agreeing. It's more a moment of everyone, like, their energy shifting here. Around her, something started stirring in that silence. It was faint at first, but slowly it grew stronger, a sense of slow, gradual, and still hesitant acquiescence. More and more strongly, it started to make itself felt, rustling faintly through the unimaginably great crowd all around them, in small, shy, uncertain streams at first, then gathering strength and moving slowly as waves through tideless water. How long it took, there was no telling, but the agreement grew until Nita could feel it on her skin. A whisper of wind, a rush of sound like the slow, certain rush of the waves up the beach by the Palaeans' home. She glanced at Kit and saw him shivering a little with the growing quiet force of it. Even Paunch was feeling it. He sat there wagging his tail as all around them the silent acquiescence grew. It was another of those out-of-time moments that might have lasted an hour or a day or a month. In this otherworldly world heart there was no telling. But there came a time when at last the acceptance was complete. When that had happened, Quelt moved slowly to the center of it all, where Dhruva stood, and held out her hands. And Quelt takes the world's kernel and says the choice that was made can be unmade. It's time to unbuild it. And Kit and Nita stood there waiting for whatever would happen. The lone power turned its back on the proceedings, though it moved no farther. And very slowly, things started to get brighter in the world inside the world. The radiance from that dazzling and impossible sky began to build. And everything begins to sort of dissolve at the edges. And Paunch is like, okay, we really fucking need to go. And they bail and wind up being taken out into a sort of pocket in space, looking down on the world. I was a little surprised by two things. One, there's no moment of goodbye with Quelt. There's no final look between them, really. There's no sort of connection that they make just before. Quelt just begins the thing. And I'm not really mad at that because, like, honestly, with this kind of thing, how do you say goodbye? Like, it would just be an odd moment. And writing it would feel trite. I don't think there's any like goodbye that would feel satisfactory. And also it's just like so incredibly not about them that I feel like her taking a moment to say goodbye to them does center them in a way that they don't need to be for this moment, you know? So like, I'm not mad about it. It just surprised me because, you know, there's a way things like this usually go. So they're in space and they just watch the world begin to basically like implode is too strong a word, because once they go back down, the world is still there. The house is still there. The pen with all of the little flying sheep things are still there. The world is still there, despite the fact that there was like lightning cracking and storms of magnetic fields, and the horizon burst in spiky spurts of blue jet and red sprite lightning. Slowly, the atmospheric fury died away, and then light began to grow here and there on the world's surface. They leaped and curved through the lower atmosphere, but then found their way up and out, and once into space, shot free like meteors in reverse, growing brighter and brighter as they pierced up and out of the atmosphere. And I really thought that this was like a combination of the spirits themselves and also the actual physical pieces of the planet. But no. Ever so slowly, the rain of fire began to taper off. Kit and Nita and Punch stood there, watching the world gradually go quiet again. And then the planet erupted all over in one last blast of brilliance, with uncounted and uncountable streaks of soul fire piercing upward and out of the heart of the world, as those who had gone before and had been in the whispering now erupted into a freedom that only one of them had ever anticipated. And they watch this, and eventually it calms down, and when they look at each other, Kit says, "Now what?" And they're like, "We gotta go home." And Kit's like, "Yeah, well, we left our stuff down there, so we better go get it." And this is the moment where I was like, "You left your stuff down. Can you go get it?" Like, I just assumed that the planet was just not really the way it, like, you know what I mean? It's described as a blue world turning underneath them, a place both very old and suddenly new. And I thought that meant that, like, there was basically like a complete sea change, and I mean that very literally. So I was surprised that they had shit that they could go pick up at all. And they vanished, making their way back to an empty world is how that section ends. And then we go back to Dareen. And Dareen is still right in the sun. And she is yelling to Philip and Scarrett about how they have to save Roshaun. And this moment is so funny because it's not even like we see what Roshaun did. He just like walks into the sun, makes it sound like, from the way he like, just from his whole attitude, like he's gonna die. And then when, understandably, Dareen is like, "What the fuck, we've got to do something." All of a sudden, she hears him say, "What in the power's names are you doing?" He came walking up out of the sun the way someone would come walking up out of the water, occasionally slipping a little to one side or another, blown off kilter by the furious wind inside the sun, but otherwise unhurt. And slowly the tachocline was beginning to calm. Dareen stared unbelievingly at Roshaun as he ascended calmly and regally back into the wizardry and locked himself once more into the Matrix. And he's like, "Yeah, we really need to get out of here because there's going to be some CMEs and we will get absolutely fucking cooked." So Scarrett says a word and they are right back down on the planet, and Dareen, who genuinely thought he was about to commit suicide on all of their behalf. I'm pretty sure, like, she just assumed that was because, like, that's what it seems like. She yells, "Why did you do that?" Roshaun paused for several breaths. "Because I didn't have to," he said at last. And he said it in the speech, so it was true. But his eyes, which would not meet hers, told her there was more to the matter than that. What the fuck does that mean? Is this supposed to imply that he's got, like, a crush on Doreen? Is that it? Are we doing this? I don't like it. Look, I just don't, like, he is not redeemed for me. I have sympathy for him in some ways, but no. Sorry. I don't think so. And I love this. Doreen literally just walks away and goes to bed. Like, she doesn't even say anything more to him. And I found that really funny. Like, the image of him saying, because I didn't have to, her just looking at him and then just turning the fuck around and going into the house without saying anything else to anybody after, like, the insane night they just had. You know, I found that very funny. And she lays in bed and she's just thinking about how completely perfect this team was and that the powers obviously sent them expressly to deal with this problem and knew exactly what they were doing. And Doreen had no idea when she finally fell asleep. In the morning, the sunlight streaming in her window woke her up, and it was just normal sunlight, not something much more terrible. And Spot shows her the CMEs, which are, like, spectacular and are being noted by astronomers all over the world, but they are not going to be an issue. So at the thought, let's see, maybe there'll be some less quiet times ahead. At the thought, she grinned and went down to say good morning to the house guests, and to one of them in particular. When she says, maybe there'll be some less quiet times ahead, what is that supposed to be like? Maybe I'm going to hook up with Roshaun now? Like, I don't like any of this. I don't like any of it. It's fine. Honestly, in some ways, it makes so much sense that Doreen would be drawn to somebody who is, in many ways, as arrogant as she is. Because, like, you know, like, genuinely, she is. I love her, and she is infuriating. So that feels right. But she's charming despite it. And he's not, you know? Anyway, okay, so then we go into the epilogue. Nita and Kit waited above Alaalu for a long time, far up in the darkness beyond atmosphere, to make sure everything was safely over with. And they transited back down to the planet's surface and stood above the house by the sea, looking down through the lengthening shadows of local sunset. For as they came down to solid ground again, neither of them could hear anything but a great silence. And they go back and look around the house one last time. She didn't know why, but she folded up the coverlets they had been given and left each of them carefully at the foot of the bed. And Kit lets the flying little sheeps out of the pen so that they can get back to their roots, hopefully. And they're talking about how cool it would be to just not need bodies anymore. And this is one of those things where, in many ways, I agree. You guys know, I find bodies, they're very poorly designed. They are extremely cumbersome, fragile, prone to problems, and genuinely require a lot of, like, upkeep and frustrating interaction that I don't care for. So on the one hand, agreed. I would love to not need a body. But on the other hand, I really love Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. I really love a hot bath. I really love 60-degree weather and colored leaves on the ground. I just, I'm not really done with it. That's all I'm saying. So they head back, and as they're heading back, Kit starts laughing and says, "Do you remember what Ura said to us before we left?" And it takes Nita a while to recall, and remembers that he said, "Try not to destroy your host civilization or anything," which honestly was so good. I really, really enjoyed that moment. Like, it is so, because that's not what they did, but I mean, if you were looking in from the outside, you would definitely be like, well, they showed up and then they left and the planet exploded. So yeah, that's not what happened, but it looks like it. And then it ends with, a moment later, she and Kit vanished. Night came down on the inner sea of Alaalu. And not very much later, the Keks came out of the water, up onto the dry land, and began at last to build, not models, not the plans for their new civilization, but the real thing, the civilization itself, in a world that had at last been vacated by its old tenants and was ready for the new ones. So, the way that's phrased, the Keks this whole time were building models and plans for their new civilization, is what's being implied here. And I love this because I really felt like there was something going on with them that was significant, but I couldn't fucking make it fit into anything. And they are the next life form that is going to evolve forward, and they're being stunted by the choice that the other beings on the planet made. What a wild idea. Like, I just really like that. I just think that's so neat. I really want to see what their civilization looks like too, because apparently they build some intricate shit, It's like enough to draw everybody down to the beach and watch. And I can't imagine like doing that over and over again and they're just like getting washed away every time. And granted, like, I am assuming that they don't really even know why they're doing it themselves. Like, I don't think as they're building that they're really going, and we'll put some, 4th Avenue here, and we'll put the post office here. Like, I don't think it's like that. Because when Doreen questions them, like, what are you doing? They just say what needs to be done. So they haven't evolved enough for it to be, like, materially a plan. But it's clearly an impulse driven by forward motion of their consciousness. And I just think that's a really cool idea. I just really want to know what the fuck Diane Duane is smoking. I know I've said this before, but like, honestly, this bitch is bananas. And I really think she would be super fun to get stoned with. Like, she must just have some wild shit to say. This is also organized, in her stories. And what is it like to talk to her when she's like not figuring it out and keeping it within the confines and lines of a pre-planned plot and having to wrap it? Just must be really something. Let's see. Sorry, Imas, over here chatting a lot. It's going to be a crab world, LOL. It's so wild, too, that it's a different type of being that's going to evolve at this planet because we tend to think it would be the same as before, but they would have a shorter life or something. For me, I don't think it would be the same as before, but I say that, and then I think about, the way it's gone historically, and Homo sapiens were preceded by beings that were very similar in, overall build, So maybe I should think it would be the same. But I sort of when I wonder what the planet would be like if human beings were to suddenly ascend and disappear, my assumption is that it would be a different being that would take over. I'm thinking probably raccoons Y'all know I love a raccoon. And raccoons they seem to just know too much. Either them or crows. Those are two animals that are just a little bit too smart. A little bit too smart, if you ask me. It took them some hours to get home. The crossings was as busy as always, and Grand Central, too, was congested when they passed through. For Nita, getting into her backyard at last was a tremendous satisfaction, if a little strange. Look how close the horizon is. He nodded. Weird. I love that. There is nothing like going somewhere else and getting used to it and then coming home and being like, what the fuck? And if you've never experienced that, you haven't gone anywhere different enough from where you're from. Because it genuinely is a shock to come home when you've gone somewhere different enough. When I was living in Guatemala and I came home, everything here felt so fake. And I say that while acknowledging that coming home, I also was like stunned at how comfortable everything was. But like, it was just wild to me. First of all, everybody all had like dental work done. So everybody's teeth were perfect. And I had gotten so used to seeing people with really messed up teeth. So many people use like skincare products. So people's skin here is just a lot better than the places that I was living in Guatemala. And overall, people were living with injuries and stuff that they don't have to here. Scarring, that kind of stuff that they don't have to. And as much as that feels like an inherently good thing, when you see it after being in somewhere where people are just living as they live, without making alterations, it feels plastic and strange and unnatural. And same thing with the houses. I was used to living places where literally the walls did not necessarily meet the floor or go all the way up to the ceiling. There were big spaces purposefully to let there be a cross breeze because it was hot and it wasn't like they had AC. And there was an openness to the house because they needed that cross breeze for it to be fucking livable. And when I first got there, I was like horrified because just things can go in and out of your house. And I got used to it so quickly. And then I come home and it just feels sterile inside of our houses. It feels like a fucking hospital. And I hated it initially. I really was not comfortable with it. And then if I went back now, I would probably just like be very, very uncomfortable with that again. It's just really weird what you can get used to and how it just throws everything else into such perspective and you don't realize it's even happening, you know? Yama in the chat says, I mean, the US is pretty fake. I mean, word. And I say that like, because I was about to say like a lot of Western civilization especially can be like this, but honestly, the U.S. really stands alone because of the way that we like live in, for example, the amount of space we have in our houses. Have you guys seen washer dryers from like the UK? It is so pitiful. It's like, what even is this? Why do you have this? Like washer dryers in the UK, first of all, they're super tiny. They don't actually dry. They just kind of like, it's like more of a centrifugal force thing. And there's like air that gets pumped, but it's not like our dryers dry a load of clothes in an hour. That is not how it works in the UK. And I won't even get started on Guatemala because they had a centrifugal force thing and that was all they had. And then you hung that shit up and hoped it didn't rain. And that's how that went. But the reason that like appliances and stuff are so small in the UK is because they have like tiny homes. The amount of space they live in is often just a lot smaller. And it's really funny when you watch like the like House Hunters International on the Home and Garden channel, I think it is. People aren't ready for that. People are planning to move overseas and they're really excited. And then they actually start to see the options that are available to them and are shocked at how tiny these living spaces are. I am used to an oven that I can fit a whole turkey in with the roasting pan and maybe even put that on the bottom rack and put something else on a top rack. I don't think so. Not in a lot of those ovens. absolutely not. I just, yeah. Anyway, sorry. Tangents, but so many tangents. Yama says dryer is a new thing here in Brazil for the rich. Here you hang it in iron. Yeah, same. And it's one of those that I'm like, I understand how wasteful a dryer is, like energy-wise, in theory. But also, you just cannot beat freshly dried clothes. The smell, the warmth, the fluffiness. Oh, God. I didn't like... Last night, I took out my very, very soft pajamas right out of the dryer and put them on. And I swear, I almost came standing in the middle of my kitchen. Like, it was just that good. You just can't beat it. It's like one of the joys of life. Genuinely top 10 list. So, yeah. It's one of those where I'm like, yeah, it's really unnecessary. And it's a huge waste of energy, and I know. But also like, oh, so great. So she calls out to her dad, and he comes out really excited and hugs her and says he misses her. And he says that he missed Kit, which I really liked. I keep forgetting how much their parents care about each of their friends, you know? They're part of the family, essentially, but I sort of forget that. I never really had this relationship with any of my friends' parents. And I had, you know, parents liked me because I was mostly very polite, and I knew how to play that game. But I never saw any parents consistently enough or had an open enough relationship with any of them to have that sort of like energy between us. Nita went to put the kettle on. Where is everybody? Where's Doreen? The boys are over at the mall, Nita's dad said. What? They just went alone? We're doing that now? Since when? What? How is that okay? They barely made it last time. I guess, like, Roshaun basically made it better, even though he got mocked. They had Carmela with them. He doesn't say anything about Carmela, so I'm assuming she's not there. But, I mean, and Scarrett seemed to be mostly fine. Philip, if he isn't, I guess the two of them can rein him in. But I was genuinely like, what are you doing? And they get a phone call here. And his dad picks up and he's like, it's for you. It's someone on Mars. She took the phone and threw Kit a bemused look. Holiday's over, she said. Kit shrugged and went to get some tea. And in the living room, none of them saw Spot crouching down in the middle of the floor and whispering in a voice dry with dread and hardly to be heard, "Uh-oh, uh-oh, uh-oh." And that is the end of the book. You bitch. Diane Duane, how dare you? I don't feel like she's ever left it on quite that much of a cliffhanger before. Like, that is definitely over the top. And I don't like that Spot like knows this shit before anybody. Spot's OP. I'm just gonna say it. But yeah, who's on Mars? Do we know anybody? I don't think we know anything about Mars. I may be wrong. Might have just slipped my mind. And I mean, I'm assuming that the phone call from Mars has something to do with what Spot is upset about, but I don't know that. It might be totally two unrelated things. But yeah. So that is the end of the book. What is the name of the next one? Yama, do you happen to know off the top of your head? I'm going to have to make a new banner image for it. But, yeah, this book, I didn't like this book as much as some of the others. But that said, it's playing with a really sort of esoteric idea that's a lot less climactic in its way. So it makes sense that it wouldn't be as engaging in a sort of basic way. I think it's certainly the most elevated of all of the ideas that she's been playing with in all of the books, though. This is a pretty advanced sort of conclusion to come to, you know? Oh, no. Yeah, Yama says the next book is called Wizards at War, and then follows up with, which, no thank you. Same. No thank you. Oh no. A war on Mars. I don't want this. All right, I'm going to have to wrap up. But thank you guys so much for listening. I hope that you've been enjoying it. Thank you again to Patricia for commissioning this episode. Thank you to your ma, who sent me kind of a wedding gift. Your ma, I appreciate you a great deal. Via PayPal yesterday. I got that shit. And it is super, super needed right now. So very, very much appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to starting the next book, but also very much not, now that I know the title of it. So I guess we'll have to see how that goes. All right, guys. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.